Hello and welcome to iOS and Android development. My name is Mario Janot and this is the first tutorial and in this tutorial we are going to do the famous Hello World in both environments, meaning we're going to see in this tutorial how to have Hello World displayed with a button click in iOS and also in Android. So let's start. I have here Xcode, so that's my IDE, integrated development. Integrated development environment. Um, so I'm using right now, as we can see, version 9.3 beta 3, and I'm going to save this project in a folder which I have here, iOS Android projects. As we can see, it's empty right now, and that's where I'm going to be saving a new project. So I'm going to create a new Xcode project, and the template that I'm going to use is a single view app, iOS. Click on next. Give it a name. So the name of this project will be 001 Hello World and iOS. Okay. And of course the programming language will be Swift in this case. So I'm going to click on next. Save it exactly here in this folder, and I can make sure, which I'm not going to be using right here, but this is important for the source control, make sure that this is checked, the create git repository on my Mac. Click on create, and here we go. This is my environment. If I click on the main storyboard, I will have the main view appearing here, and up here I have the simulators, and I'm going to choose in this case iPhone 7 since that's what I have, but of course it could be any other simulator. And down here, if I click as the views, I'm using right now iPhone 8, which is the same resolution as iPhone 7, so that's going to be perfect. And I'm going to add two things. First thing I'm going to add is a label to be able to display Hello World, and a button so that when I click on this button, Hello World will appear in this label. And I want this label and button to be centered vertically and horizontally. And also, I want to be able to um, make sure that the width of the label and the button is 50% of the width of the device. Okay, so let's start. In here on my right, I have all my objects, and the first object that I want is a label, so I'll just search for a label and click and drag anywhere for now, and also a button. So here's my button object, and just so that I have an idea where they are placed in space, well, for the label anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the text that's there by default. Okay, so right here in the properties, I have my text here. I'll delete that, and as we can see right now, it has disappeared. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to write something in here and change the background color to, let's say, yellow. And now I'm going to delete the text. There we go. That way I have something appearing. At least I have a width. And like I said, the width of this label, I want it to be 50%, so half of the width of my device. So we're going to see how to do something with that. As for the button, well, same thing. I'm going to, let's say, change the background color of the button. I'll give it the same color. The text, in this case, will be just click on it. Oh, and the label, I'm going to select it and make sure that the text is aligned, that I'm using the center as an alignment. And like I said, the button is going to be the same width as the label, meaning that it's going to be half of the device. And I'm not trying to do that right now. I'm just making sure that everything is proper for now. So to do this, to be able to have my label and my button centered vertically and horizontally, one good way of doing this is to use what are called stacks. So, but before doing that, before adding these two objects in a stack, which is somewhat of like a grid, I'm going to make sure that both of them will keep their proportions. So, so I'm going to select, let's say, the label. Well, let's select both of them. And right here, add new constraints. I'm going to click and choose aspect ratio. So that's going to make sure that once I have these two objects in a stack, they will keep at least their proportions and not be all deformed. So I'm going to add two constraints. And once that is done, I'm going to select them both and click on this little icon, which is the embed in stack. And there we go. So now, as we can see here, I have my label, my button inside of a stack, which is a way to group this. And I would like to have, let's say, 8 points or 8 pixels as a space between these two elements. So if I click on my stack view, and in the properties, I can see that I have spacing here, and I'm going to choose 8. And there we go. Now the stack, I can place it in the center manually, but of course, once the stack is selected, I can click here on the align icon and choose horizontally in container and vertically in container. And there we go. And after that, what I want to do, like I said, I want both of them to be I want them to the width to be half of the device. So what I'm going to do is from the stack view here, I'm going to do a right click and select the view, which is the parent view. Okay, so let's do this again. Right click, I have like a target here, and I'm going to bring it on the view, which is the parent view, and I'm going to choose equal width. Okay, so now it's the same width as the parent, which is the device width. And proportionally, everything has been done correctly because I have that constraint. Now, once I have that, I can go and choose the menu show the size inspector or the panel, and as I go down here, I have my constraints. As we can see for the stack view, I have center X, center Y, and I have also equal width to super view. And if I click here on edit, I'm going to choose as a multiplier 0.5, and there we go. We now are saying that the width is equal to half of the super view, which represents the device width. And there we go. So that is good. And if I wanted to just test this, nothing's going to happen when I'm going to click on the button. But if I wanted to test this in the simulator, I'm just going to click on play here, and it's going to compile. And we are going to see that in portrait mode or in landscape mode, it's going to do exactly what it's supposed to do, which is always have a width of half of the super view. So as we're waiting for this to compile, I'll explain what we're going to do next. Well, there, it's already here, so let's see if everything's okay, perfect. And if I do a command right arrow to change the orientation, I can see that it's still in the center vertically and horizontally and half the width of the device. And there we go. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have connections, or in this case what they are called IB outlets, connections between the label and connections from the label and from the button. And actually the type of connection for the button is going to be an event action, and the button is going to be a property, well, it's going to be a property connection. So there we go. So let's do that. So if I stop the simulator, and what I'm going to do, oh, and before I do that, if I look at the different views here, if I click on for the iPhone 4S, we can see that everything resizes correctly, even for the iPad. Alright, so I don't need this anymore. I don't really need this here. That's going to give me a little bit more space. Double click, and let's bring this in the center again. I'm going to click here. This is the show the assistant editor. So it's the assistant editor. If I do this, I have now split my views. I have here my view controller, which is my class that controls this view, and I have here my other view. Now I'm going to resize this like that, and I don't think I'm going to need this right now, so I'm just making sure I have enough space. And here is of course my class that controls this view, and this is where I'm going to create my connections. But before doing that, I'm going to just use comments to separate different sections of my code, just to make things a little bit more easier to read. This method did receive memory, not very useful for now, so I'm going to delete that. I'm going to also delete the comment, and actually I don't even need the view did load for this example, so I'm just going to delete that. So all I'm left with is my class, and I'm going to, the first thing I'm going to do is create a connection from my view my label that is in my view and my class. So to do so, I'm going to click on my label here and click on the right button of my mouse and do a connection like this and choose the type of connection, which is an outlet. Okay, that's it just means it's going to be a property in the class environment, and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to give it a label. And we can see the type is UI label, user interface label, and the storage, there's two types, strong and weak. Not very important right now, and we'll leave it with its default, which is weak. And I'm going to click on connect, and there we go. We now have a connection between the object that is in this view and there's a connection with this class, which gives us the opportunity to control what happens in our view here. Okay, and the next connection will be not an IB outlet, which is a property. It's going to be an IB action, which is a method. So I'm going to click on this button, do the same thing, right click on the mouse, click and drag, and the type of connection, I'm going to choose action and give it a name. So I'll give it something simple like a button. The type, it's a UI button, and all the rest will leave the defaults. So I'm going to click on the button connect, and there we go. We now have a method connected to this object, this button, which is, the method is called a button. And this is where we are going to simply write what we want to happen, or we're going to give an expression that will express what we want to do. And what I want to do is have hello world appear on this label. So how will we do this? Well, the object is a label, and I'm going to use one of its properties for that object, which is it's text, and equal a string, quotation marks, and I want to have appeared hello world exclamation point. And there we go. And that's about it. So if I launch this, and click here, I get the hello world appear. And that's all we need to know about how to do this in the iOS environment. So what we're going to do now is the same thing in Android. And I'm going to quit Xcode, Command Q for quitting the simulator, and in my folder here I'm going to copy this name but change iOS to Android. Whoops, not all caps. Alright, and I'm going to launch Android Studio. And the version that I'm using right now is pretty much the latest version, which is 3.0.1. So I'm going to select Start a New Android Studio Project, give it a name, and it's going to be this name, so I'll just copy it from here, paste, and I'm going to make sure, as we see here, project location, iOS and Android projects, hello world. Perfect. So I don't know why it's putting a 2 here. There we go. Anyways, so that's the location. Let's see. I'll click on next, and this is just the what is the form factor. So phone and tablet. That's perfect. And I'll choose an empty activity. Click on next, and here don't need to change anything. Click on finish. And it's going to build the project, and what I want to see is the fact that I just deleted the 2. Is that going to be a problem? So let's go see here. Nope, all is good. Hello World Android, and there we go. So it's still the Gradle here is still building. What we have by default is 2 things open. Here is the class, so this is the equivalent in iOS as the view controller. Okay, and here I have my imports, and I'm going to change. It's not going to inherit from app compat activity. I'm going to change it to the default activity, and by doing so I don't need to import that package, so I'll delete that, and also do the same thing I did in iOS. Oops, I'm going to use comments just to make things a little bit easier to read. There we go. And I'm not going to delete the onCreate method here because we are going to need that method at one point. Okay, so I'm going to leave that like that. Here in the activity main XML, that is the equivalent of course, what we had in Xcode, which is the storyboard. So in this environment, it's called an activity. I have a default hello world, so I'm going to delete that. And also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the theme. If I click on app theme and choose device default light, no action bar. Okay, so that looks a little bit more like what it would look like on my phone, on my Android phone. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is have a label and a button that will be in the center. Now, as we can see, constraint layout. That's not the layout I'm going to be using to do what I need to do. So I'm going to go, instead of being in the design environment, I'll click on the text environment, and I can see here this is the constraint layout. I'm going to select that and choose linear layout. Okay, so that's the linear layout. If I go back to design, see in the component tree it says horizontal. That is going to be perfect for now. And just so that we can see what we're doing, I'm going to change the background color. So when I look at here, I have the attributes. Okay, so attributes, and I have here background. I'm going to click and color, and I'm going to choose orange. Let's use green then. So I have for my linear layout. To do what we need to do, it's going to be very important to change the gravity of this layout so that things will be centered horizontally and vertically. So I'm going to go and find gravity, and I'm going to choose center vertical and center horizontal. Okay, so that's good. If I go back into text, I'm also going to add, in this case, so I'm going to add what is called a weight sum. So Android weight sum, and in this case I'm going to say 2. Do I need to? No. Weight sum. No, I do need to. Let's say, okay. So the weight sum, what it just does, it says whatever is going to be a child to this linear layout, whatever I'm going to add, the sum of because I'm using horizontal here, the sum is a value of 2. So if I put something in this linear layout at like another layout and tell it that its layout weight is 1, well, it's going to be half of 2, which will make it centered. It's going to be a little bit easier to understand once we do it. So if I go back to design and choose another layout, which is going to be a linear layout vertical, drop it like this so it's inside of it, and I'm going to change in this case, well, I'm going to start by giving a different color so we can see. So I'm going to use orange, and as we can see, it's covering the whole thing right now. But if in the layout width, if I say 0 dp, which dp is device pixels, okay, now I don't see anything, okay. But if I go back to my text and add Android layout weight, and I choose 1, what I'm saying here is that the sum, okay, so the sum of the parent is 2, and I'm saying this one has a value of 1, which is half of 2, and that means, and I'm saying also that it's centered vertically and horizontally. So what we have is this, which is half of the parent. Okay, so that's good. Now if I click here, not very important, but it's saying that there's a baseline, that attribute that is missing. So I'll just click on fix, and that warning will disappear. Okay, so now in my linear layout vertical, I want to add a text. So if I take text and I what is considered a label in Android is a text view, and I'm going to click and drag that like that, and I see that it's right here. Okay, so it's up here. Let's bring that up. So it's up here, and if I go back to my text and I say, well, you know, that layout, okay, also will have a gravity of, you know, centered vertically and horizontally. So I'm going to just copy that and give that to my linear layout. And if I look, now it is centered, well, it's centered both ways, but I could have just said just simply vertically. Anyways, I have my text, and I'm going to click here and say text alignment centered. The ID as we can see here, is the way that we're going to do a connection. So I'll call it like we did in iOS, a label. And the text by default, well, there's not going to be any text by default. So I'm going to delete the text, but go back here in background so that I can change the color, and let's make it blue so we can see what's going on. So the idea is a label, and now I'm going to need a button, and since this is a vertical linear layout, I just have to go into widgets, take this button, just drag it like this, and it's right down here. Now let's change the background color of this button. I'll give it the same color as my label, and as we can see, there's no space between them. Let's choose label, and in the layout margin bottom, I'm going to choose 8 dp for device pixels, just like we did in iOS. This button, I'm going to give it an ID so that I can make a connection. So it's going to be just like we did in Xcode, a button, and click here. The text that will appear will be click. Let's make it all caps. And here it's saying hard-coded text. That just, well, it just means that it would be a good idea to extract the resource so that if we wanted to change languages, it would be a lot easier. So I'll click on Fix, click on OK, and there we go. Now we are ready. Well, maybe before doing any coding, let's launch the simulator to see if this is working properly, at least the layout. So I'm going to click here to deploy, and I'm going to choose a virtual device, and I'm going to use, I have one for a phone and one for a tablet, so I'll choose the one for a phone. Click on OK, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So it's installing, as we can see here, and launching the activity, and there we go. So, and if I change the orientation, we have exactly the same thing as we had earlier with iOS. Okay, so now what we're missing is, of course, an action. When I'm going to click on this button, I want Hello World to appear in this label. So I'm going to stop this simulator, and now it's time to go in the main activity.java, which is the controller that controls the elements in this view. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an object. So the first one is going to be a text view, and I'm going to give it a name. I'll give it the same name as my connection, so it's going to be a label, and semicolon, because we need in Java to close off our expressions with a semicolon. I'm going to do another, I'm going to declare another object, which is going to be of type button. Give it the name a button, semicolon, and inside of the onCreate method, I'm going to assign values to a label and a button, because right now they are only declared, but they have no assignments, meaning they have no values. And I'm going to do that in here, so that once the project has been compiled, it will be able to simply give assign values to these variables or these objects. So let's start off with a label equal, and there's a function that is called find view by ID. So R, that's the resource ID, and there's my ID, which I called a label, semicolon at the end to close off the expression, a button equals whatever the find view by ID function will return, and again R for resources, ID, and a button with our semicolon at the end. Now what I have to do is create a method for the button, so that when I click on the button, it's going to do the action. So outside of the onCreate method, I'm going to create my own method, which will be public, will not return anything, so void. I'm going to give it a name, and let's call it let's say click action. Okay, and click action will create an event listener, or I'll set an event listener to my button. So a button set on click listener, and to do so we need a new view. So new view, and the first one says view on click listener. Click on return. That's perfect, and it imported all what we needed as packages, and public void on click view, perfect, and I now can tell it what I need it to do. So when I click on this button, what I want to do is put hello world. So it's like setting the text of the the label with the hello world text. So a label dot set text. Okay, so that's the method associated with the label object, and between the parentheses I'm going to give an argument to the parameter, which is going to be in quotation marks hello world. Okay, so this method click action is not being executed, meaning that it's not it's not being called, so nothing will happen. And I can see that it's not being called by the fact that it's gray. So once the project has compiled, it's going to execute the onCreate method, and then I'm going to tell it, why don't you call the click action method, which defines what happens when we click on the button, which will display hello world in the label. Command S to save. I'm going to launch the simulator, choose the same one we did earlier, and it should be a little bit faster, and there we go. And if I click on the button, I get hello world appearing in the middle, just like we did with iOS. And of course I could make sure that the colors here are not being displayed like we're seeing here. Let's do that. So linear layout, I'll just delete all the colors here. Same thing for the vertical layout, and we're just left with that, which were not the colors that we chose in iOS, which was more like yellow. So let's use that. Okay, and there we go. So I'll launch the simulator again. Oh, I have here a warning. Let's click here. Useless parent layout. Let's see here. I think it's saying that there's no use for this layout. Well, I am using it, so I'm going to ignore that. Emulator, and there we go. Let's change the orientation. Click here, and we get the hello world. And there we go. So that's about it. And that finishes off this tutorial. So with that, thank you very much, and see you next time.